Well, good morning and happy St. Patrick's Day. Yeah. Some Irish and some want to be Irish are in the room this morning, which is pretty cool. I recently had found out, I guess it was a little while ago now, that even though I kind of grew up in the world that I was Irish, Robert Kelly, right? And so it was kind of what the family really thought of us as Irish in many ways. I found out I was like 3% Irish through the DNA testing, and I was like, so Irish is an issue of the heart. So yes, if you feel it, it's true today. So enjoy your celebration. So I went on vacation recently, and as part of this vacation, we went paddleboarding. I don't know how many. Any paddleboarders? Any people who do paddleboarding? No, one? It's like two. All right, I'm going to talk to you for a second. No. Is there anybody else that does? Has anyone done paddleboarding? Nothing. Oh my goodness, so few. Okay, a couple of hands over there. So I did it like once before, and I was terrible. And so now we're on vacation, and Cheryl, she grew up on Guam. Cheryl's my wife, by the way, for those that don't know. She's really good at it. She's totally solid. So I was on my knees, and I paddled out, and for a big part of this. And then we were on vacation. This is Cheryl, of course. Then we were on vacation. That's Conrad and Kelly back there. So they went with us. And all of them, apparently Kelly's like a rock star paddleboarder. And so at some point, we got across the channel, and they're all starting to pop up and stand on their boards. So, of course, I had to because of ego. And so, I couldn't just, not there. And so I'm like, I got to try this thing. And so and it's a big channel. It's some pretty big water. And again, this isn't like a thing for me, not really, really good. And then the picture here is I was looking backward. That's Conrad and Kelly. That's Conrad's coconut. Because I don't, coconut? All right, anyway. So then, but Cheryl's not in this picture because she's already at the other side. She already crossed the channel. She's ahead. So she's gone. And I'm not a great swimmer, and so she and I had to really figure out why she left me behind to die here in the middle of the channel. And so there it comes, right? We're standing there in this pretty big water, and a boat way off in the distance goes flying down the channel. And there they come. The waves. The wake. And I see them coming. And I see a lot of them, ripples all the way to the boat. The boat is now long gone, and I'm starting to see the first of these ripples. They're coming toward me, and I'm kind of like backing up. I'm like, what am I going to do? And so I decided I had to figure it out. So I said, all right, I got to face them because that's what I'm told. Somebody told me one time, you take a boat, you face it. And then I thought, wait, but this isn't a boat. This is it's a paddleboard. Maybe I'm supposed to do like a surfboard. It's supposed to be, the waves are supposed to be behind me. So I'm trying to spin to go let the waves hit me. But then I was indecisive, so I started going back to face them in the front, but I had second-guessed myself, so I decided I should. And then by the time they hit me, I was perfectly sideways, which, of course, is the absolute worst place you could want to be when it comes to this. And so the thing that really got me is these waves, they started way across the channel. They just kept marching for me, just coming. And then they went long past me as well, long past. Waves distant, away from you, waves way back from your past are still hitting up against you today. Not even in your own past, but in the past, from other people. Waves that people have made in the past are still washing up against you and going way past you as well. And in some ways, that could be a very frustrating and disturbing kind of a thought. But these ripples are also a very cool thing because you get to make them as well. And so you, yourself, get to make some big waves. What will those waves do? Where will they go? Who will they impact? What shores will they wash up on in the great distant future? Because that's actually what happens. We often don't think about this in these terms, but when people you get a little older, you start thinking about your legacy. What's going to be left? What am I going to accomplish with my life? What will people remember, or what impact will I have in 20 years, and in 100 years, and even in 1,000 years? What is my legacy? Sometimes parents will have children in order to leave a legacy. Right? It's like imagine throwing the rock in the pond, and your kid is that for you. You're hoping vicariously to live somehow, even immortally, through your offspring, through your kids. But it's more than that. Like our first Holy Communion. You're here. We're going to be celebrating a little later this first Holy Communion ceremony with these young kids. This is an amazing opportunity. Why did you bring them here? Why do you do this? Right now, if you're not doing it simply for a religious ceremony, if you've actually thought through this and you think to yourself, I'm going to bring them in here, I want them to be involved in a church, I want them to experience their first Holy Communion, I want them to learn some things that matter in this world that maybe they won't learn anywhere else. Why do we put our kids into any sort of Kids Quest, religious programming, or anything like that? What are we doing? We want them to become the kinds of people who will do good in the world. We want them to be the kinds of people who, when they make a splash, it's the kind of a splash that we can be proud of. It's the kind of a splash that we can look at and go, those waves will matter, not just for their lives, but for the lives that are to follow. And so, we have young people here, a lot of young people. You're in a stage in life where you're trying to figure out, you're trying to decide, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? Make some waves. Make some waves. Do some things that will matter in the ways that matter. Do that. Some of you are older now and you're thinking, well, I kind of ran my race like it's kind of, really? Because you have today and you have tomorrow and you have the very next day. What will you do with the rest of your life? Will you make some waves that matter? And that's what we've been looking at over the last few months, couple of months, this book of Ruth. It's only 4 chapters in the Bible. I'm going to be kind of dropping into the whole story here this morning. And so some of you you missed some of the previous weeks, if any of this is interesting to you, I encourage you to go back there. Everything is on the website, all the old messages. But I'm going to kind of give a little bit of a summary, and then we're going to kind of jump in on to a couple of key ideas. But here's the thing. What we've been watching is how some very, very ordinary people have made an extraordinary impact in their lives and the lives of the people all around them for all of history, including to this very day, this very moment, including the kids that we're going to be celebrating here in just a little bit. So we're in the book of Ruth, and by way of a summary, it's the story of a couple of widows, Naomi and Ruth. Now, a lot of names in this book. So Naomi and Ruth. Naomi was an Israelite. She went to the land of Moab. She came back. She had Ruth with her, her daughter-in-law, but she lost everything else. Her husband, her other daughter-in-law, and her 2 sons, all gone. So now it's just Naomi and Ruth. They're coming back to the land of Israel, to the place in Bethlehem. And what we saw is that this was a phrase in the days of the judges, the days when the judges ruled. This was very, very, very dark days for the whole of chapter 1. They want us to be thinking about just how rough these days really were. And what we saw there is that suffering, which seems so pointless in all of our lives, we find out that Jesus can redeem it, that not a single drop of our suffering needs to be unredeemed, but all of it can matter for the kingdom of God. Then in chapter 2, we saw how a character named Boaz was able to spread the wings of God, provide a shelter, provide a covering for people in need. In this case, particularly, it was Naomi and Ruth. And Boaz, in standing in where he was and with all of his influence and all of his experience, was able to spread the wings of God, was able to protect the most vulnerable people in society. He did this in a whole lot of different ways with great dignity, and this was Ruth chapter 2. And then in chapter 3, the last couple of weeks, what we've seen is Naomi hatched this harebrained idea that seemed absolutely absurd. And what she was really doing was everything that she could to try to do something awesome for her and for Ruth. And she was taking huge risks, and God met her in all of those moments. And so we took from that this idea that we can expect great things from God and we can attempt great things from God. And now it brings us to Ruth chapter 4, the very last chapter. This is it. There's only 4 chapters in this whole story, and it has been an absolutely wild ride. I have enjoyed it thoroughly. I hope that it has been meaningful and impactful to you. As we get into this last chapter, we're going to see that God's Redeemer is finally made known. His Redeemer is finally made known. Now this is where things will get pretty interesting for us in a slightly different way than we've been talking about in the past. And so I'm going to jump in, and we're going to look just at a couple of texts here, starting in Ruth chapter 4, verse 1. Boaz, he went to the town gate and took a seat there. Just then the family redeemer he had mentioned came by. So Boaz called out to him and he said, "Come over here and sit down, friend. I want to talk to you." So they sat down together. Now, what happened here in the story is Boaz was asked in chapter 3 from Naomi to actually do this crazy thing. She and Ruth concocted this plan. But Boaz, there was another guy in line who should have done it. It was this guy, the friend. He was actually supposed to be the family redeemer, and Boaz is asking him to do what he ought to do. Now, at first, it seems like there's a whole lot of money involved and there's wealth involved, and so this is a great opportunity for our unnamed friend. But here's the kicker. The scholars, they struggle translating this word friend because it's very rare in the original Hebrew. And everywhere it shows up, it has this idea of ambiguity, almost as if they're trying to bring out the fact that this guy here, he's just somebody. In fact, he's really just anybody. In actuality, he's kind of nobody. He's Mr. Nobody. The best we can actually come up with is calling him something along those lines. And then this guy, this random dude, who I'm not even willing to name, has come by. So we're going to call him Mr. Nobody. He is the friend who was supposed to do the thing that Boaz was asking him to do. Then the man replied, he was asked to do it. "All right, I'll redeem it." Then Boaz told him, "Of course, your purchase of the land from Naomi also requires that you marry Ruth, the Moabite widow. That way she can have children who carry on her husband's name and keep the land in the family." "Well, then I can't redeem it," the family redeemer replied, "because this might endanger my own estate. You redeem the land. I cannot do it." The guy was all excited when he thought this was going to extend his property and make his little fiefdom a little bit bigger and maybe even provide some real money for him and his kids and his legacy. But when he found out that it had this whole other thing and Ruth and Naomi and another man's children and all of this kind of thing, he was like, "I'm out. I can't do it." The price that he was willing to pay just couldn't do it. This was something that was going to benefit me, but now that it's not going to benefit me, now that it's going to cost so much, now I'm not willing to do it. See, Boaz, he steps in because this guy, Mr. Nobody, refuses to do what he ought to do. He was told by the law to do it. The social pressure of his community was to do it. And he was like, "I'm out. I simply cannot take that kind of risk." If you want more on that, Pastor James talked about that last week. Awesome message. You're going to want to see that online. Verse 13. So Boaz does it. He took Ruth into his home, and she became his wife. When he slept with her, the Lord enabled her to become pregnant, and she gave birth to a son. Now, this is super cool because when we see this, the women of the town said to Naomi, "Praise the Lord, he has now provided a redeemer for your family." This idea here is the vital and most important thing, this idea of the redeemer. Now, if you want to know what a redeemer means, because it's not a word that we actually use unless you're like redeeming some coupon or something like that. That's not at all what we're talking about. You're not exactly redeeming a coupon. You go through the rest of the Bible and you find out how else is this idea used. And what you find is some pretty cool stuff. You find out that when we're talking about Israel in Egypt as slaves, when they're rescued by Moses and they're brought out of the land of slavery, it's said that they are redeemed. That's the same idea, same word. If you're talking about a person who is destitute, a beggar, poor, been handed a raw deal, if you come alongside and help them and you restore their family fortunes, if you restore them to some sort of societal status, you give them dignity and respect, you have redeemed them. It's a super rich, it's a beautiful, beautiful biblical idea. In the book of Job, everyone knows Job because he suffered a ton. Job, when he was suffering, when he was looking for his suffering to be alleviated, he spoke about his Redeemer. If you're alleviating suffering, you are participating in this great work of redemption. Now, here's a really interesting use of it. If you were in that day and age and you had done something wrong, if you screwed up, and you have a consequence, you have some sort of penalty that you have to pay. You've messed up, you broke a law, you sinned, you hurt someone, and now you have to pay the consequences. If the person who's demanding and could hold you accountable decides not to hold you accountable for your wrong, for your guilt, for your shame, if they decide to not hold you accountable, they've redeemed you. This is such a beautiful context. Now here's the kicker. All of this points to the one son that was a part of their conversation, right? This was it. This is what the neighbor women said in verse 17. The neighbor women said, "Now at last Naomi has a son again," and they named him Obed. He became the father of Jesse and the grandfather of David. I told you there's a ton of names. This is like a Russian novel. There's like names all over the place in this story, and you got to know some of them just to keep track of the story. But here's the thing. Obed was the kid, but notice what they said. They named him Obed. Now at last Naomi has a son. Wait, this was Ruth and Boaz's son. How is it suddenly Naomi's? That's her mother-in-law. How does she get a son out of this? That's part of the redemption that was required. This was actually a replacement child for Naomi. This is actually going to be her heir. He is going to be the one who will protect the family in the future. He is going to be the one who will develop their resources and their property. All of this isn't going to be credited to Boaz. It's going to be credited to the dead guy from chapter 1, Elimelech. This is why it was so crazy and why the other Mr. Nobody couldn't do anything about it, because he's looking at this and he's saying, this isn't going to benefit me. This could actually make my life more difficult. And Boaz is like, no. I'm going to honor the past. I'm going to honor even the dead man Elimelech, who had made so many mistakes. And so here we are. This child is given to Naomi as if it were her own. This is a replacement child for all of her loss and all of her heartache. And everyone in the town sees it. The women in the neighbor, they go, no, now I know what's going on here. So they look at Obed as the family redeemer. But it's more than that, because what we're told is that Obed became the father of Jesse and Jesse the father of David. And so the narrator knows something that they didn't know. They didn't know this. They thought that Obed was their redeemer. But actually, this child is going to be the father, great-grandfather of King David. And so Redeemer Obed actually gives birth all the way down the line until King David. And King David became the redeemer of the whole nation of Israel. So the book began in the days of the judges when everything was horrible and everything was terrible. But it's going to end with the king who Israel desperately needed. This great king of Israel, King David. You could call him Redeemer David. He's actually the redeemer that the narrator is writing us about. He has a different vantage point altogether. He sees something that the characters could never even see. That King David, Redeemer David, was going to do what Boaz did for this family. He is going to do for the whole nation of Israel and rip them out of the days of the judges and establish this righteous and compassionate-filled kingdom. Millions and millions and millions of people are going to benefit. But here's the real kicker for us, because we have a better vantage point than even they had. Because we know that King David, his kingdom eventually went south under his son, Solomon. But we know that his great-great-great-great-great-grandkids had kids, one of whom was Jesus. So if you look into the New Testament, 1,000 years later, you come to their great-great-great-great-grandchild who was King Jesus. And here's the real kicker. Everyone in that day wanted King Jesus to do what King David had done, kick out the Romans, restore the Israelites to freedom, be like a Moses, and do all of that kind of stuff. But King Jesus had a whole other plan. He disappointed everybody by dying on a cross. This is what this Holy Week is going to be all about. Good Friday. We invite you to come out, be a part of it. Good Friday. It is us recognizing the moment that Jesus laid his life down willingly for us. Why would he lay his life down? Why would the king lay his life down? Because he was doing battle against an injustice and against an evil that's in here. The reason that the reason the days of the judges were so bad and the reason that King David's empire eventually fell apart, it's because of us. Because we have sin in our hearts. And King Jesus, Redeemer Jesus, went after the sin in our hearts. He paid our price that we deserve, the death that we deserve on the cross. And he exchanged for us his righteousness and put it to our account. And now he says, in that moment, in that power, in the power of the resurrection, Easter, we're going to be celebrating the resurrection of Jesus. This is the promise of resurrection power here and now so that we can become the kinds of people that do this kind of thing. That Redeemer, Jesus, you see, the vantage point changes everything. We get to see how more fully and beautiful this picture was. And what this means is that your soul is redeemable. Your soul. If you think about who Ruth was, she was a Moabite, an outside foreign woman. She became an Israelite. She was a daughter-in-law of suspect background. And she became greater than 7 sons, the scriptures tell us. She was this widow who became a wife. She was a grandmother, right? She became a grandmother to King David. But she became a great-great-great-grandmother to Redeemer Jesus. This is what happened. Her soul was redeemed. And your soul is redeemable. It doesn't matter what you have done. It doesn't matter your past. It doesn't matter the mistakes that you have made. Your soul is redeemable. If Ruth is redeemable, you are redeemable. This is the promise that the scriptures tell us over and over and over and over again. If this is more than simply a religious ceremony for you, if this day, if coming to church is more than simply what you ought to do because you've always done it, if coming here is an opportunity to meet King Jesus, your soul is redeemable. That's the beauty of what we get to see in the scriptures over again. And here's what we get to see from Ruth is that your past actually gets redeemed in the present. The things that you have done, the mistakes that you have made, the things that you regret, where your shame is building up, right? The Easter series, it's getting past your past. This is what we're going to cover for the whole Easter series. This is some of these ideas of what it means to get past your past. What we see it here, how it happens here, is that the righteousness of Ruth, the compassion of Ruth, right here, right now, in this story, is actually rewriting her storyline. She goes all the way back. Remember, she goes to Abraham. I told you a lot of names. His nephew, Lot, Lot's wife, the one who turned around, looked back at Sodom and Gomorrah, turned to a pillar of salt. You remember it from Sunday school lessons. That's Ruth's legacy. The daughters of Lot who did unspeakable things with their father. That's Ruth's legacy. And she gets to rewrite all of that right now because of her righteousness and her compassion. You get to rewrite that story right now. You get to do that. You get to make a splash. You get to write. Imagine this. All of those waves that kept hitting Ruth, threatening to knock her off, all of the different waves, all of the rejection, all of the people, all of the critics, all of the people who were raising that eyebrow, all the people that didn't trust her, all the people that pointed to her back, her background, all of those waves hitting her. And you know what she sends forward? Redemption. She sends redemption forward. How can we become the kinds of people who can receive all of that, can take all of those waves and send waves forward that are redemptive rather than toxic, rather than dangerous? This is what we get to do. Because from redemption comes redemption. She took the whole storyline and she redid the whole thing. This is the most beautiful way. So Elimelech, the guy that we mentioned, this guy's dead and gone. He screwed up. He shipwrecked his family. And because of the faithfulness and the courage and the love of Ruth and of Boaz, he's not going to be forgotten. He actually has an heir. He actually has a child who is going to become a redeemer, who will also send the redeemers. This is in a sense, they have given Elimelech immortality. From redemption comes redemption, in the power of your redeemed life, right? This is what Jesus on Easter Sunday, resurrection power, and he said that I am giving you resurrection power, the power of the Spirit deposited in your life to unravel all of this sin and to take this horrific past, the hard things that we've done, the mistakes that we have made, take all of that sin and to redeem it in you in this day and to send forward redemption to others. power, resurrection power, the power of the Spirit in each and every one of us. It ends up to the salvation of all who will trust in Jesus, and you get to be a part of that. We had visited one of the great cathedrals in Europe. La Sagrada Familia, I think, or something is the way you pronounce it, I'm not sure. It is absolutely a wonder of the world. It's one of the most beautiful cathedrals anywhere in the whole of the world. It is still being built. And so I don't think it's going to be built, finished for another 10 years or something. I think they've been building it for about 100 years or something like that. It is spectacular. I've been to a bunch of different cathedrals. This is unusual. It's unique. It's spectacular. There's a little image of the inside of what it kind of looks like. Anyway, it's absolutely stunning. Right in the front, there's this little column. And while we were walking past it, I noticed that it was a list. It was a genealogy on this column, right? Kind of the central pillar was the family line that led us to Jesus, as if you had to walk past the history that led us to this place, right? It was a beautiful moment, and you can barely see it, but they wrap it in iron, and then they tell you there's a reason for it. I think the reason is because I don't want people touching it. But anyway, they wrap it in iron, and you see you can make out those letters just a little bit there in the middle. What does that say? It says Boaz. It says Boaz. Engraved, carved into the stone of one of the most beautiful cathedrals the world has ever seen. A Gaudi masterpiece. And Boaz. And you know what's so amazing about all these names? I keep telling you about all these names. The names are of insignificant people. They would have been irrelevant in the story. They're only relevant, a guy like Boaz, because he lived with faithfulness and righteousness and compassion. And that led to something that he never even could have seen. He didn't do it for legacy. He did it because that's what God called him to do. And now he gets his name carved into this column. It'll be remembered for 1,000 years. This will stand as a testimony to Boaz and to Ruth and to Naomi. And you also can get your name, no matter how insignificant you feel, carved into the book of life, depending on this redemption that's found in Jesus, so that you get to create a new storyline, a new redemptive storyline. You don't be a Mr. Nobody. You're not going to remember the name Elimelech. You're not going to remember Orpah. Anyone remember Orpah from chapter 1? No, because Orpah is a Mrs. Nobody. And Mr. Nobody from chapter 4, we don't even need to know his name. He's just not, because they've decided to not do what God is calling them to do. They've decided not to be part of a new creative storyline of redemption. You can be. You can invest. What we're doing here, why we bring these kids and why we do First Holy Communion is we're investing in the next generation. Why do we have these Kids Quest classes? Why do we have Fusion student ministries? Why do our folks continue every week to invest in our Ignite, 5th and 6th graders? Why is it that we have discipleship groups to help every single person who's interested in becoming more and more like Jesus, a group of people, a group of peers who will help them do that? We have small groups designed to help you pray and to learn to be a family together. Why? Because we are helping together, this family, this community, creating a new redemptive storyline, raising up the next generation. We are making a splash in them and through us so that we can actually know that God will use that. Those ripples, those waves, they will, 1,000 miles on the open ocean. 1,000 miles. That's what we're hoping for. These new and beautiful redemptive storylines. Let's invite the kids to come on up. Give them a round of applause here.